And welcome back. LinkedIn Live, Facebook Live, we're across all the lives. And Tracey, thank you so much for joining.
That's okay. Thank you for having me, Dan. Thank you.
No, not at all. So this is pretty cool. So I think this is the power of just serendipity and connections and LinkedIn. So I was speaking to my sister a few weeks ago and we were having a chat, and she said, oh, you need to speak to my friend Tracey. We live together out in Cyprus. And a quick look through LinkedIn and a few messages and a chat, and here we are.
Here we are. I know. Yeah. Power of social media.
It's amazing. It's amazing. So we had a chat about a week ago, and you were telling me about your business and how you kind of got started and all of that good stuff. And I kind of want to focus on you talk around the Language Alchemist, and as an English graduate way back in the day, I have a love for language and for storytelling, but I really want to get that from the science behind it. I think I like it from a kind of the creative, isn't it nice? But I think you're really well versed on the whys and the whats behind.
Yeah, and I think it's just a catchy name. It just started conversations, and I found that when I was going to when I was people asking me, what do you do then? And it was so difficult to explain what I do. And it was all around language, and I'd sat for hours thinking, okay, so how can I actually bring a terminology up for this to get people to understand? So, an alchemist is turning base metals into gold. So when you look at people's language, I just basically turn their base language, which is not serving them, the old habitual patterns, which is causing them trouble or, it's affecting their life in some way. And I just get them to reframe them. We look at the habitual habits and we literally reframe them to something that's more constructive and a lot more helpful for them on a day-to-day basis, which is so empowering.
That's amazing. And is that really, is it as powerful as you can just tweak either the words or the delivery? And it's just a whole new level.
Massively. The amount of breakthroughs we have with people. And they just sit there, and once I've just reframed something small, and it might be one word, and they'll just go, oh my God, that just feels different. And it comes back to the feeling with it, because when you think about these words and these sentences that we use, some of them, they just don't serve us. If you're saying, I'm really struggling today, and being mindful of that word, because if you're saying I'm really struggling today, you're in that struggling, and you're going to stay in that struggling, just reframing it by saying something like, I'm busy today and that's okay. And I know this might sound very basic, but once, like you said, once you put the science behind it and we go deeper into the causes or the root causes and be able to just flip those words, they have a massive impact.
Okay, so I don't know how much we can cover in the half an hour we have, but how deep can we get? Like how because it's almost like a mindfulness thing. It sounds like it's almost if you're in it, if you're talking around I'm struggling, even as opposed to it's been a difficult morning or I've been busy or whatever it may be. What is the science behind that? Is it a because when we started talking, I was almost thinking it's about how you portray yourself to others, but does it actually start internally?
Yeah. So it starts. It's both ways, but I mean it starts internally as well, because when you are speaking, we're unaware of it, because our habits, our language habits, a lot of the times, I think it's something like 40-50% of the time we walk around in an unconscious state. We just program just to get on and do things. And I think it's probably higher than that as well. So when we are just like going away in our day-to-day lives and these little words pop in and we're not aware of it, you leave that unattended over a couple of years, even a couple of months, so somebody in that emotional state who's starting to struggle, and they get up every day, start repeating that phrase and start saying the same thing. There's an emotional connection to your thought and your feelings, and it's not fluffy stuff. It really isn't. We're basically getting you to look at the mechanics of your mind. And, I've done some research on a couple of Navy SEALs as well, with some articles on it. And one, especially out in America, Mark Divine, his name is, he started a lot with this stuff, with the mindfulness and looking at, the habitual, just calming the mind down, But what we want people to do is just to be aware of the emotion and be aware of the language and the word it says behind it, so the emotional connection to the word and the statement. But there will be, because, up to, I think it's something like 95% of your thought process is emotional based. We're not aware of it. Yeah, it's as high as that. And sometimes because the emotion is very low level, and like I say, when we're walking around in our unconscious sort of lives, we just get on with it and don't necessarily probably notice it or pick up on it unless it's like a higher leveled one. But even the smaller ones make an impact.
Okay. So do you think this affects men and women differently? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or is that, not to go down a real stereotypical, but it's probably going to come up. Is it because on the whole men have historically not been as willing to talk about either emotions or even aware of their own emotions?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of science and stuff behind it anyway, and women are more emotionally connected in that sort of sense where, I think we're in the emotions a lot more, and I think, like you said, it's just picking up on it, noticing it more, and it's taking that now, when you've got that self-awareness of the emotional side of things, it's now what am I going to do about it, and that's where the bit that's not fluffy. I mean, we've got the biggest computer system in our heads. So why are we utilizing them a lot more and just really starting to learn a lot more about us as people? Because each one of us have got our own filtering system. Each one of us, our brains, we've wired our brains in a specific way. And when you think about the language you learned as a child, you've learned that language so that you can learn a different language as well. I've done it. And if I can do it, anybody can do it. I can tell you that.
and when we talk about, you're saying like learning a language, and I'm just trying to find the balance between the actual words used and the delivery mechanism. So, I was watching a video on TikTok last night, and it was talking around, the delivery, the inflections of delivery, the monotonous or the rising or low. And I thought, that's very cool. But then is what you're talking about more the words or the delivery, or is it all irrelevant because it's just all connected with the emotions?
Yeah, so a lot of it's very connected. I mean, the tonality does make a difference, isn't it? I mean, if I'm going to be a monotone and speak like this, but obviously I get high pitched and start feeling a lot happier, you can start feeling that. Where the science does come into it is that smile, and whether you smile, whether you mean it or not, that smile would biochemically change the way you feel anyway, because the body will still release those feel-good toxins. So I say to people, just smile, even if you're in a bad mood, just still keep smiling, because it'll still sort of release things. Instantly moving the body around, gets you sort of like, I'm a bit more upbeat. But when you're going back to those sentence structures and the way you feel, so if you got the presentation that you're thinking about in 5 hours' time, you start worrying about that presentation and how it's going to go. What happens there is that your thoughts are starting to run away with you. So you start thinking about the presentation. And as you think about the presentation, at the same time, that emotional connection will be towards that presentation. And if that presentation doesn't go very well, that's going to store that in your brain as that memory. But attached to that memory will be the emotional connection to it as well. So that's why then the next time somebody thinks about it, and it also as well is the people that surround us, is the way they speak about things. It's why is it that so many people are afraid of spiders and possibly not afraid of ants? When you think about the habitual language patterns that people hear around us, we pick up a lot of it, but we pick up on the fear and the emotional connotation to it as well. So it's similar to that of a tuning fork. So if you think of the tuning fork, and you sort of tap that tuning fork onto a glass, that glass will vibrate in the same frequency. So that's very, very similar then to the sort of words that you use and the feeling that you put to that word. And that's what we'll end up sort of, we send that frequency out to people.
Yeah, It's fascinating, isn't it? Because I noticed that because my wife will always, I'll get stuck on a word. I'll say I can't remember. Serendipity is one that I'm using a lot at the moment. It's kind of it's just I've heard it around a few places, and I'm like, that is the perfect explanation of what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And now I use it every other sentence. And my wife's like, oh, who's been talking about serendipity? and I think you just don't kind of realize how. It's like osmosis, isn't it? It's just we're just taking this stuff on constantly. I guess if we're doing that, how would we even go about making a positive change?
Now this is where it comes in, because the change takes discipline. And it's exactly the same as your physical health. Exactly the same. So if you're aware of it, and aware of when and how that impacts you. So basically as well, so if we take that presentation as an example, you're thinking about that presentation in 5 hours time. What happens during that lead up in that 5 hours when you've got other stuff to do in work? Are you at your best then in that 5 hours because you're focused on the emotional construct for the 5 hours time? So it impacts that side of it as well. So when the discipline in it is to be able to reframe it pretty quick and bring in the sentence structures together. So habits, for us to bring in a new habit, hence why people fail at habits on New Year's Eve. They'll say a habit, but they won't bring an emotional link to it. They won't bring the picture to it. They won't put a plan in place. So, it's the same thing with your language patterns and your emotional concept to it. So, basically when we go through a structure, it's like, be aware of the emotion. Okay, what is the emotion? Be aware of it. Okay, I'm not feeling quite right. What is it? Oh, I got that presentation coming up in 5 hours. Name it. Right, how am I feeling? Anxious, nervous, I'm a bit worried. Name the feeling, really sort of just sit there and think, what is it? Is it anxiousness? Is it worriedness? If it's anxiousness, okay, so accept it. All right, accept that I'm feeling anxious at the moment, and then stop and pause. And this is the part we do nothing. And this is where we can bring the box breathing into it, which is just bring back into that sort of moment. So doing that box breathing at that point will help then for you, the rational mind, to come back in, and it bring the intelligence back into it, because now you're bringing the intelligence into the emotions. And this is how it's not fluffy at all. This is just being really intellectual with your emotions. And then reframe it, reframe it. Go, okay, so I'm feeling anxious at the moment of that presentation. How do I need to feel? Is it calm? Is it clear? Is it confident? Is it knowledgeable? You bring those words into, and also train on the power of 3 as well, which is quite sort of, that can help as well. But if you want to be calm and knowledgeable, okay, so this is how I need to be thinking. Start thinking about calm and knowledgeable. Write a little mantra out, a little sentence, because what your brain will automatically do, will go into default and then start thinking about the anxiousness, because the anxiousness will automatically take over, because up to 2/3 of the way you feel and what you think goes into negative. We have to really work hard at bringing it back in. So just pop it back in, and just focus on calm and knowledgeable. Feel the feeling of calm and knowledgeable. And a really good tip on to do that is to think about a previous time that you've done something similar. And then just bring that picture up, because the memory will be there. You bring the picture up with it, you bring the feeling up with it, and then you sit in that. So what you're doing then, you're replacing the feeling and the emotion.
That's really interesting, because I was just going to say, because I have to, and I talked to a therapist last year, and I was talking about my with my logical brain on how I have kind of the circle of control, circle of influence, and then kind of everything else. And, if it sits in this circle, then I can, and he was like, that's great if you're giving a talk on it. If you're a keynote speaker in a theater, that's great. However, as humans, we have emotion, and you attach emotion into one of those. And it's very easy to rationally go, okay, so I'm feeling anxious about this presentation. So I'm just going to acknowledge that and go, okay, now I'm going to start thinking about calm. But actually what you're saying there is link it back to a time you felt calm, or link it back and connect the bridge, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, because when you think about memories, quite often, if I asked you to think about something from a past event, which way you come, you bring the memory back up, you bring the picture back up. Quite often, the feeling would be attached to it as well. So it's linking and making that bridge with it as well. And this is where the discipline comes in as well, because in that 5 hours, you will keep going, flipping back into default, going back into that anxiety. And by sitting down right at the start, and it takes minutes to do, and being very rational and being very astute about it, that will enable you then to have a plan in place, you know, and become more strategic with it. And that's how then it doesn't become fluffy. Then it becomes a lot more thought-provoking.
Yeah, and flipping it back onto some of the men that you might work with, and do you find that because I'm assuming that some of your work is going into organizations or going into and do you find that if you're giving something, something to a group of people, and there are guys there, that they kind of switch off maybe a little bit when you start talking about?
I remember one of my first ever ones, and I think we had 6 men and 2 women in this particular group of people. And after walking, I was like, oh my gosh, here we go. They're just going to start thinking, oh, this is all fluffy. And it was really, really fascinating, because then all of a sudden my limiting beliefs started popping in as well. So I'm standing there going, okay, this is how you're going to have to do it, reframe and start thinking about a different way of feeling, because instantly I'm starting to put my own perceptions onto that. So I took control of that first. And it was fascinating, because after the first, I think it was just the morning, I was just doing a talk with it and stuff. And one of the gentlemen actually came up to me and he said, Trace, I normally check my emails throughout stuff like this. He said, I've not checked them once. And he said, I can't believe 90 minutes has just gone by. And that was for a very small group of people, because I was quite specific for them. And it didn't win them over as such, but they'd seen it in a very, very different way. And a couple of them went on then to start doing a lot more work along these routes as well, and started learning a lot more because of it. So it was very much sometimes, and I still get it now if I'm doing a keynote. I'll get a couple of guys to come up at the back and they'll just go, God, I always think this stuff is going to be fluffy. But I think it's the way you deliver it as well. It can be fluffy. I mean, if I wanted to be, I can be fluffy with it, but it depends on the audience as well. And if I am talking to a group of guys, because quite often I do, a lot of my work is around men as well. If I can bring it back into, and I just bring it back into their arena. So whether it's military, sports, corporate, I'll just make sure that the words I use are connected to what they're familiar with as well.
No, that's brilliant. And I'm going to say we've got about 10 minutes left. So anyone watching, if you do have your comments or questions, please make sure to put them in the comment box, and we will, I won't do anything apart from say, Tracy, someone has asked. But yes, we will get around to that. But I think even that's a really valid, interesting thing, right? Because you obviously pre-COVID, you travel all over the world doing this. How have you? Because what I guess what was your life before and the transition? Like, what made you want to go into what you're doing now?
So my transition was basically I didn't have these tools, and I'd gone through my own sort of. I've gone through my own, marriage breakups, fertility problems and stuff. And we've gone through 6 rounds of fertility treatment and stuff. And it came to the end of that 2.5, 3 years, and we were just one after the other. And, myself and my husband, we just weren't strong enough to keep it together at that time. So, we went through the divorce as well. We still get on really, really well. I mean, we're good people. We're lucky in that sense. But I didn't have the tools. I really did not have the tools to help me through that. And bless him, when your husband puts himself on permanent night shifts, you've been the mood hoover. That miserable mare. And I just wanted to change it. And I'm a very driven person. But what I realized was, because I was in Cyprus at the time with your sister. We were on our FA criteria at the time, and I had some amazing, I went for counselling. It was absolutely brilliant. It had its place. But for me, it wasn't enough. It was just going round about the issues. So then I went externally and got some more help, and then realised, the light bulb button comes on. And then I was like, oh my God, I need to learn this stuff. And I haven't stopped learning. And I just travelled around the world with it. I travel globally with the work as well. And I think where I can sort of maybe have that rapport with people is that when I've got people in the room who are at that level where I was 5-6 years ago, I've been there. I've been there, and I know what it's like, that when you're just stagnating in it and you just don't know how to go or where to go or how to move out of it. So when I was absolutely rubbish in school. I was I'm not academic at all, but when they do this work, I just I'm like a sponge. And I think now I just want to pass it back. So, anybody out there feeling the same, that they don't know what to do or where to go or how to start, there's so much stuff out there at the moment. And just learn about yourself. And that is the most powerful thing I can say to anybody. Just learn who you are.
Yeah. And it's funny because I was talking to my team about this earlier. We had a team call earlier, and I was saying that because I like to be very busy. I like to, that classic have some downtime. My downtime is doing more stuff. I get very restless if I kind of have downtime. Yeah. But some days I go to bed quite late or early in the morning, and if that happens, and then also my daughter has a bad night. Like yesterday, I was a write-off yesterday. There was no point in me, I was basically keeping on top of emails, keeping on top of calls. Nothing much else was happening because I'd had about 4 hours sleep. And I then told the team about this today and said, look, if I was off with anyone yesterday, I really apologize. I don't think I was, and I said, it's kind of like it gets to about 11 o'clock at night. And I think, right, I've got a good 2 hours to just do something. Even though I know I'll be tired the next day, I can crack on for these 2 hours. And then like last night, I had about 8 hours sleep. So I went to bed early and I kind of got up later. And I feel like I've got more to give than the 2 hours that I'd have gained if I'd have stayed up late. And so I don't know whether there's kind of a bit of sometimes we're so busy that we go, I don't have time for self-development right now. I don't have time to think. And it's actually that, well, actually, if you make that time, you will exponentially grow.
Gosh, yeah. And it is, Dan. I think, we're so busy, and especially if you've got a family as well, juggling it all. Like you said, where is the time for that personal development? But this is where this is where if we can squeeze things in, if you're going for a run, listen to the podcast, brilliant stuff. Now there's amazing books, there's more and more people coming out talking about this kind of stuff. YouTube's brilliant for it. I've got my Kindle on my phone. So all my books now I buy through audio as well, because I spend a lot of time in the car. The car's a brilliant place to listen to stuff when we can. Just picking those snippets up. And then what I tend to find for myself, and this is maybe a good tip for some people out there, is at the start of the year, I obviously look at my business plan and stuff, but I look at what I want to develop with me in that same year. And I timetable it in. So if I want to go to that seminar, if I want to do sort of like some training and stuff, I'll timetable it in, because I've got my own business. I can then put myself out in during those 12 months. If I don't do that, at the tail end of last year, it just goes. I mean, 6 months last year just went, and I hadn't put that in the time. I hadn't put it in the diary. So, structuring it around as well can be quite useful, and doing it with groups of people as well. So you've got accountability to it.
Yeah, that's really, that's given me some food for thought as well. We've got a question in from Emily, who's saying, hi, Dan and Tracey, how can you use the principles behind this as a manager to help instill positive language amongst your team, especially during this difficult time?
That's a really good question, Emily. Thank you. Yeah, we've got a couple of people at the moment that I'm supporting specifically around this as well. when you're looking at that positive language, there's a lot of training out there. There's a lot of people that can help with that, short podcasts and stuff. Again, we've just done a couple of webinars now for groups. I think yesterday we nearly had, I think it was about 200 to 300 people on a webinar yesterday. And we just did an hour on literally that, going back to work, about being mindful of the internal dialogue. And if you can get your team on board and get them to start recognizing their triggers and their language patterns, and even doing it in a fun way, you know. So when we're using the universal quantifiers, like nobody's listening to me today, nothing is going right. But that's done in a sort of like a stress level. It's just getting each other to pick each other up on it in a more of a fun way as well. That can really sort of shift the feeling within the office. And if you are back in the office, you know, but think about that tuning fork as well, that the way you speak and the way you feel, that is going to impact the team around you. So bringing those principles in it, a good starting point is just to bring the team together and just get them just to start thinking about their own productive sentences. What are their habitual sentences when they feel the pressure started to rise? When they start that pressure started to rise, get them to start write it down and reframe them together and stick them up in the office and just have some fun with it. And that is one of the nicest ways of doing it as well.
I love that. It's almost thinking for Emily, it's almost like having you know, like a conference call bingo, like have your words, and when you call yeah, when people, yeah, because you hear it, don't you hear people go, nothing is going right, you know, and you think, really, nothing?
Nothing.
But you know, and I remember because I kind of like armchair psychology as opposed to what you would do, more the actual science behind it. But I remember watching something, I think it was with Darren Brown, and he was trying to prove that, I guess, you know, the kind of Confucius, he who believes he can and he who believes he can't are both right. And I remember him finding in this little village, it was two people who, one was super optimistic, just thought good things were going to happen, and one was nothing good ever happened. Yeah. And it was things like he'd leave like £10 notes lying on the floor, and the pessimistic guy would just walk straight over it and not even acknowledge it, and the optimistic would and it's kind of like it's just almost creating these environments to show that you are the product of you.
Because basically that is so true, because if I'm going to think that I'm rubbish, guess what? I'm going to, your thoughts cannot say to you, your thoughts become your reality.
Yeah.
And the way you speak to yourself internally, that is the way you're going to see yourself. That is the way you portray yourself. And it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
So, you know, what you're portraying out there, and I can say hand on heart, that is it. I've done it. I've been there. And, you know, now I've reframed. I still go into old habit loops sometimes, but I recognize it much, much quicker. And I think for Emily there as well, is with her group within her work establishment, is just start seeing, just start playing around with those sentence structures, which are good to start with. And then maybe get them to ask them how they want to move forward with it. But if she wants to get in touch and just find out a little bit more about it, but there's a lot they can be doing within the offices where it doesn't have to be so structured as such.
Emily's, I know Emily quite well. She's awesome, so I'm sure that she'll be reaching out. And I guess, you know, and just thinking we're kind of at our time, and any final thoughts? If you know, I can imagine there'll be people watching this who might even recognize some of what you're saying, but recognize it potentially even in an abstract way, like they might not be ready to realize it is them. How would you suggest someone to move from the everyone else is the problem to actually, if you're kinder to yourself, you might be able to help solve your own problem?
Yeah, and that's the thing about this work. You know, I get clients that come to me sometimes, and I turn people down because they're just not ready for it.
Right.
It's just other people's fault. And when you start picking up these words with them and just start drilling down, you know when they're not ready. But, you know, they will at some point, the penny will drop, and they start realizing, well, actually, the buck stops with me. And I start saying, you point the finger out, and, you know, the fingers are pointing back at you. And that is exactly it is, and what you put out there, it's that old saying is you sow what you reap what you shall sow, isn't it? It's that sort of, and that is basically it with your language. You put that language out there, the blame culture, and start blaming other people, you're going to get more of it back.
Yeah, absolutely.
And unless they're ready to see it, it's putting the mirror up in front of them. And the quote I normally say when I'm speaking to large groups of people is, do you want to be seen as the person the people are happy walking into the room, or they're happy walking out of the room? Which one do you want to be? And that says quite a lot.
That's very true. Do you have a podcast? Do you do a podcast?
I don't know. I just hop on.
You should do a podcast. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I just hop onto everybody else's.
Brilliant. Well, no, Tracey, thank you so much for spending some time. So it's always a pleasure. We've only spoken twice, but both times have been a pleasure. So it's always a pleasure.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for having me as well. Have a lovely afternoon.
Not at all. And you.
Okay, bye.